And you might not even be able to see me or hear me. I hope so. Um, as I mentioned before, when you have a great awakening that's taken place, because people begin to realize that, hey, we've been lied to about a lot of things. So that means they're looking for truth tellers. Okay? And one of the things that I try and do, at least when I impart information, is share my experiences of how I experience being a soul in the universe, in the cosmos, okay? And how I relate to the cosmos through my own spirit, my own living energies, okay? So one of the things that I try and refrain from doing because of the knowledge that I have about language, symbols, numbers, etc., is because we love to, as they call, out of chaos comes order, see? So we try and put things in boxes, label them, because we love to have all of our ducks in a row, okay? And one of the reasons that we do it like that is so that we can keep track of all of our stuff, so we don't have to worry about losing anything that we have in memory, okay? And I know this because of my own experiences, which deals with trust. I implicitly trust the cosmic order of things. I naturally have a trust through my heart, my soul, and my spirit that everything is going to be just fine. Okay? So, in knowing that, because I've experienced that, as means testing my own experiences, that it works that way on how we go faster through the cosmos, there are certain rules that we obviously learn through the experiences that we learn from. Okay? So I could speak in any language that I choose, provided that the message imparts the truth, and the truth is based on what we believe is true. And so now we get into perception. The perception that different people have of what they believe is true versus what they believe is not true. And we can measure the belief system on what they believe is true by perception, vibration. All we have to do is measure the speed at which they're vibrating. And that's going to tell us what? The dimension they occupy and the density they occupy, what their density consciousness is. So what I try and avoid is what I call all the word trap games. Okay, so it makes it easier to sort of explain how things work through the experiences that I've had, and how we can explain the density and the dimensions that work in what's called a universal Stargate Templar complex. Okay? So, for example, what prompted this was watching simply part of a video about a gentleman named Tuluk, Tulluch, that was just put up with an interview that Carrie Cassidy had because she runs Project Camelot. She was one of the early let's put it this way, she came on the scene with interviewing, quote unquote, whistleblowers, people that come out of the intelligence community, they come out of the aerospace community, they come out of the intelligence community, they come out of law enforcement, and they start telling us that here's some information that you've probably never heard before about what's really going on about a space program, artificial intelligence, slaveholder races, black hat ETs, the Draco reptilians, who the Nazis are, who the tall whites are, etc., etc., etc. Because all this information for the average Joe Blow on the street are things they've never heard of before, unless they've had direct experiences themselves with those entities, in which they've had a direct experience in which they've experienced what that is. Otherwise, it's all hearsay. It's all secondhand knowledge. If you didn't experience it directly, then how do you know it's true? You simply have to trust the other person that it might have been true for them, but that doesn't mean that it's true for you. Okay? But there is one thing that we can measure, that we can all measure, and that is our vibration. Okay? And our vibration tells us everything about the perception through which we perceive the universe that we experience, which is the one that we give energy to experience. And that's based on vibration. Okay? So, for example, if you love who it is that you are, okay, love is just a word, okay, Love, but we measure it and attach the word to it by the frequency. And the frequency is the frequency in which the wave goes up and down. Or is it a longer wave? So if it's a shorter wave, what is it doing? It's filling up more geometric space, isn't it? Remember I talked about the orchestra and all the instruments that are in arrangement? So if the universe wants to maintain its peace, its harmony, its balance within itself as a sum of all of its parts, then it wants to fill all of its geometric space up, which includes all of its dimensions, with units of consciousness that are all in what? Peace, love, harmony, balance with itself. Because it's one of the things that I pointed out earlier. If the universe is losing light, it's because I'm aware that there are more beings that I'm aware of that have lost its light. So that means I have to restore more of what they are in order to restore more of what I am. That means the universe is losing light, isn't it? So what you begin to realize, and I mentioned this on another video with a guy named the Lucid Dreamer, is that the universe was scheduled for a racer. And why is that? Because there were too many higher density beings that were having to drag along the lower dimensions, because the lower dimensions were not gaining enough speed in order to what? Gain enough lift, okay? Because they were producing too much drag. That means the universe is not expanding fast enough unless it's going to collapse on itself, which, remember, is the difference between the minus, the slash, and the plus side of the speed. Remember I talked about a track meet? The universe, which is the sum of all of its parts, is in a track meet against itself, okay, which is the sum of its consciousness, which is the sum of its self-aware parts. If more of its parts are feeding on the rest of those that are energy producers, what happens? You lose all your light. Remember? Consumers and producers, I talked about the trophic levels in biology, okay? So there were some that voted to erase the universe, okay, and push out another one. That's one, if you remembered one of my other videos that I mentioned, I walked into the, where was that? It was on the big island of Hawaii where the big Keck telescope is. And I said, hey, listen, how much light do you think you'd need that you could pull through your heart to kick out another universe? What do you think even prompted me to even ask somebody a question like that who works at the Keck Observatory? Because that's exactly what's happening. When Alex Collier had mentioned about increasing the frequency in each dimension, it means trying to lift, speed the lower dimensions up so that the higher dimensions are not dragging the lower dimensions along, because the lower dimensions are not, remember we talked about the speed of learning? In other words, we're not producing enough lighthouses using the exponential function, which means we can measure the speed of the unit of awareness. How fast is it learning? How long is it taking in order for a soul to maintain what it's aware of, which is itself, when it's aware of the light that it keeps on attracting more of what it is, then it's producing the expansion of that light in that universe. If you have more beings that instead of graduating in a pass or fail course, and instead they're losing light instead of gaining light. And remember we talked about measuring how many students we fail in a classroom on a Milky Way University campus system, how many students we failed here, okay? These are scalar measurements that the galaxy has to examine and measure. These are measurements that the universe has to be aware of and measure on a scalar scale, on a universal scale, okay? So this is one of the reasons why I try and stick to just the basic, fundamental, simple concepts of how light works. How do we track more light? Because the density and the dimension that we occupy, which we're aware of, which is our state of consciousness, is based on speed. Simple as that. So I throw out all the words about who this guy is, where they're from, and all that, because you can get lost in just a mountain of text and books and names and stars and where all these things are from, and get lost with the simple translation of what we're trying to get across here, which is the truth, is the fact that we're losing too much light. That's the bottom line. We're losing way too much light. So that's why I come on here to show the simple ways and how this works, in which increasing your speed by the simple things that we do to measure our own awareness, to measure our own density consciousness, to measure our own speed, to measure those things that are preventing us from gaining our speed, so that they can catch up to the higher density consciousness awareness of those beings that occupy the higher dimensional realms. Because otherwise we lose you. We don't want to lose you. Because what ends up happening is the lower dimension collapses. Okay? Because there is a time limit based on the exponential function of the universe wanting to expand itself and maintain the speed. Okay? And so when the speed is not commensurate with the exponential function between the loss and the gain of the light in the universe, then the universe is naturally going to kick out that which doesn't serve the greater good of the universe. It's much like a seed that didn't produce good fruit. Okay? And that's really what it is. It's a soul whose roots and what it learned, okay, it wasn't able to grow its tree of light, in which it could become a lighthouse. And it just wasn't able to do it in the time frame in which it's necessary, in which it's a part of the whole. And if it's not learning how to be a part of the whole, in which it's expanding its consciousness, which is expanding its light, what do you think the cosmic order does? Okay? It has to maintain itself for the greater good of all units of consciousness that exist in the entire universe. Okay? And that's measured by behavior. The things that we do and the things that we learn by our own behavior, that we measure our own behavior against those that we interface with. Self-improvement. The things that give us the greatest meaning, the greatest purpose, the greatest function. So I wanted to mention that because when I watched that particular video, and this particular guy came on and talked about a Lyra connection. Okay? Lyra, if you look at the 12 Stargate Universal Complex, you'll find out that Lyra represents fourth density, dimensions 10, 11, and 12, and he kept making reference to binary communications. Binary, duality, artificial intelligence. These beings come on there as what I call deflection, trying to take the focus of your attention of learning from those who understand how this works. It's like sending people on wild goose chases, okay, down rabbit holes. Anybody can come on there and say, I've had contact with a Lyran, and I was decrypting these communications, and it's just like, oh, please, where did you find this guy? So the only way that you're going to know that is if you already have knowledge about density consciousness, frequency as it relates to speed related to density consciousness, in relation to understanding how a holographic projection works to gain hyperspeed through the angular and spin rotation of particle, and your relation to it as living spirit and living light that is consciously projecting what's ahead of you to experience what that is as you move through those dimensions. But to do that, you got to be going at a high rate of speed to fill up all that space. Okay? So that's basic geometry. That's consciousness and geometry. And those are simple things to do with a pencil and a sheet of paper with a child. So anyway, it sort of helps to impart this kind of stuff to try and, as we used to say, the KISS principle. Keep it simple. Okay? This is a time when it's, in my opinion, that it's best to keep it simple so that we don't end up on all these branches that end up spending all this time in which we can pull it all in and get down to the nuts and bolts of how simple it actually is to explain how it works. You know, you got to have a point of origin, right? A single geometric point of origin in which shit happens. The universe is aware of itself. Okay, now that I'm aware of who I am, what do I do next? Hey, my imagination just kicked in. I'm thinking about this, I'm experiencing that. Wow, all these colors and these images just start appearing, and that's what I'm experiencing. And when you realize you're experiencing a state of love and joy, we can measure that on the quantum scale as 5 to 600 million hertz per second. That's a high-speed wave. Man, when you're experiencing that wave and one of these things, you got all the energy you need. You're not feeling sick, you're not down, you're not depressed, you're not feeling depraved, you're not in a state of fear. Man, this stuff feels good. Well, that's the energy that feels good. Forget the word you want to apply to it. Measure it in hertz. Okay? So, anyway, it's like, relax. We got this. They lost. You know? Remember war games? The light exposes everything, and there is a mountain of light in here. So, you know, they only know how to do one kind of thing. Lie. Okay? Deceive. Manipulate. You know? Anyway, have a good night. I love you all. Wow. Anyway, bye.